Hi everyone. In the other video on course design principles, I have mentioned learning outcomes. During the face-to-face intervention, you will be engaging in different activities that will help you better understand what learning outcomes are, why are they important, and how to write relevant learning outcomes. Regardless of the terminology used by your institution, whether you define them as learning objectives or learning outcomes or learning goals, we are talking about statements. There are clear statements that define the essential learning that I want my students to achieve at the end of the course or at the end of one or multiple activities. So these learning outcomes should be smart. What do I mean by smart? I mean specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So regardless of the specific definition, I would really like you to keep this in mind while writing your own outcomes. So what do I mean by specific? Your outcome should be clear, should be a specific and short statement that defines what I want my student to achieve. So if a student reads the outcome, it should be clear what he or she is supposed to achieve during the course or the activity. It should be measurable, and I will explain how to write measurable learning outcomes in a moment. So we should be able to gather evidence of the achievement on the achievement of the outcome in terms of assessment and evidence. It should be achievable, so not so far beyond a learner's capabilities. And it should be relevant, realistic. So in a way within the learner's reach, as well as time bound. That means it should be clarified when and in which terms the outcome could be achieved during the course, at the end of the course, at the end of one activity. It could be achieved through different learning activities supporting a more complex learning outcomes or objectives. So these are elements to take into consideration while writing your outcomes. So ask yourself, what should my students achieve at the end of this course? How do I measure this outcome? Through which learning activity? Is it realistic to ask a student to be able to practice critical reflection at the end of one activity on the first day of my course? Or should I have that as an outcome of my general course that I work on through different activities? So these are all elements to keep into consideration while writing learning outcomes. In addition to that, there is Bloom's Taxonomy of Educational Objectives, which is a classification that gives us some help while writing learning outcomes. It is a classification of learning domains from cognitive domain, affective domain, and psychomotor domain, also referred as skills, attitude, and behavior. That provides a list of verbs for each level, for each cognitive level, from the lowest to the highest cognitive level, that can support us in writing learning outcomes, making sure that we avoid, for instance, the use of verbs like those listed in the handout that you will be given, that are too general and therefore quite difficult to measure, and this is one of the elements that we mentioned in the SMART definition of a learning objective. Without going into many details that you can find on the handout on tips on what to avoid and what to think of while writing learning outcomes, I just want to mention that around 2000, the Bloom's Taxonomy have been revised using active verbs to also describe a more active form of learning, as well as a reference to the use of technology. So while we write learning outcomes, we might also want to take that into consideration and think of what is now often referred to as pedagogy wheel, which is in a sense somehow confusing. So I wouldn't suggest to take it as it is, but I would take the idea of it. So the idea that for each cognitive level we can have action verbs that refer to a more active way of learning, which is somehow also related to different levels of technology tools. So the pedagogy wheel tries to also suggest possible technology tool that could support the achievement of the outcome. It shouldn't be taken as prescriptive. It shouldn't be taken as it is, because many tools are not actually, as you can see in the pedagogy wheel, wouldn't really be effective in that level or in that section in specific, but it would be good to just reflect on the idea and the interconnection between the cognitive level and possible technology tools to support the achievement of the learning outcome that we are writing.